Because I thought the same thing. I thought that it was your fault. I thought everything was your problem. I thought as soon as Stephanie starts fixing her shit and starts addressing things, then we'll start taking care of all of these problems in our relationship. So we spent a long time just thinking that the other person was the issue and that we weren't.
I didn't think that. I knew that.
Right?
I knew you were the problem. Right? How shitty is that? That's like the part of why this is like...
The reality is I was the problem.
And I was the problem.
Exactly. Right?
Yeah, I was the problem.
That's the truth of it.
We'll make it out and fall in love tonight.
We have a bunch of episodes that we're releasing for the podcast. And this one we thought was important enough that we pushed pause in that series, and it's coming out sooner because this is a really fresh topic for us. This is something that's really present and brought up a lot of stuff. So we'll just get into it.
Yeah, we feel like it needed to be addressed now. So
right
here we are. Here we are getting into it. Talking about reactions, talking about feelings.
Yeah, it comes from a Facebook post that we did last week. And I'm going to share with you the entirety of the post. So in the event that you haven't seen it, the picture or the post is, it's just a meme that we created, right? It's the meme is every single problem in your relationship took both of you to create and will take both of you to solve. And then in the caption below, you got into it together and that's the only way you're going to get out of it. And there's 3 hashtags. This seems so silly that I'm reading the hashtags even, but I hope it'll be, we'll explain why in a minute. Hashtag healing together, hashtag healthy relationships, and then hashtag Steph and Craig. So that's the scope of the post, is essentially every single problem in your relationship took both of you to create and will take both of you to solve. Now, it has garnered some comments and some responses in opposition to this statement. And that's what we're going to unpack today. And like, I really want to start off with like, what would be a good way to start this off, even though we've already started?
I think a good way to start off, just one of the things that we've been talking about so much is how what they're feeling, what their responses are valid. How we were going to start off with validating the emotions that it brought up in others, the emotions that it was stirring up. I mean, we're going to get into the whole thing. We're going to talk about what our intentions were behind it. We're going to talk about like the aim, like who we're talking to specifically. We're going to get into it. But right off the bat, like seeing how like, oh, this triggered some people. This maybe scratched a wound or like pulled like a fresh wound for some people that they felt like it was hurtful or scary for them because it meant this, even though that's not what we meant, that it meant this. So how would we start off on talking to them?
So like right off the bat, the comments were in relation to how this statement, this broad statement that was made in this post isn't really applicable to relationships where abuse is involved.
Yeah.
So abusive, narcissistic relationships, a statement like this is not only not applicable, but depending upon the person at the time where they might see or hear that comment, it might be actually detrimental to where they're at. And we agree 100%.
Yeah.
Like all of the statements after the fact, everybody that's commented down in the threads and everything like that, we agree with everything that they have brought up for the most part, I think. I mean, I don't want to do a blanket. We agree with everything, but the general sense of like, hey, this isn't helpful. This is actually hurtful information for somebody that is in an abusive relationship where, you know, it's the whole idea of blaming the victim for the abuse. And that's not the scope of the content. That's not the scope of the post. And this isn't like us coming on the podcast and being like, this is how we're right and this is what we're saying about it. It's important that we share with you our thought processes or our thought behind it. And I also want to share what this has not done to us, but what this has done for us. Because I've been thinking a lot about this, and everything that we share online, everything that we share on Facebook, I mean, all the socials, everywhere that we're sharing content, right? Our real true like goal and mission with it is truthfully to just help. I know that there's all of these other things, right? It can be a bunch of different things. Obviously, we're creating things and content and posting things and everything like that in order to help those social media accounts grow. The more that we grow, the more people we reach, monetization, all of these kind of things as well. Obviously, there's a business aspect to what we're doing as well. But at the end of the day, like the reason that we get up out of bed and have made this our life's work in a sense, is because we truly want to just help people. And it is what we talk about on the podcast all the time, where we really believe that we all do better when we heal together. Like if you're in a family and two people of that family are super healed and healthy and everybody else in that family is like struggling, you know, I'm not equating this to a family unit. I'm just saying like our intention behind everything that we put out into the world is to really help people. The idea being that something you're going to see or come across, whether it's a meme or a post or a podcast episode, is going to spark something inside of you that's going to help you on your journey towards creating better relationships in your best life and all those kind of things. And that's genuinely where we're coming from. We're also human. We make a ton of mistakes all the time. And I know personally for me, I go fast often, and I will post something a lot of times without giving it a lot of thought. We share a lot of content, so we're constantly posting a lot of content. And when I shared this post, there wasn't anything, I wasn't thinking from the perspective of what if somebody that was in an abusive relationship saw this. That wasn't where my mindset was. I was thinking about it from the perspective of two people in a healthy relationship that are trying to heal together. That's what a lot of what we're trying to share and talk about as well, is how do you navigate the healing process in a relationship? But the whole idea is it's in a relationship with two people that are committed to the healing process. It's not about how do you navigate a relationship with somebody who's abusive or narcissistic or who isn't willing to heal. That's a completely different topic. That would require a completely different set of kind of like, I mean, content, obviously, but I think every time that we talk about stuff that is related into the space where abuse is involved and where because obviously it's an area that we get into all the time on the podcast and we talk about a lot, but we always do our best to come at those topics from a really compassionate point of view, as well as like truthfully understanding what it is like to be in those relationships. So I feel like I'm rambling now, babe. I want you to share a little bit.
No, I think you're doing a good job. The point of it is that like that wasn't the content we were creating at that moment. That wasn't the context we were giving, and we do get into it and we offer a lot of disclaimers. We see this a lot. Like for me personally, and this is like going out on a limb here, and you do not have to agree with this. You don't have to agree with this. My belief is that there isn't, not saying I'm right, okay? But my
This is
belief,
just a Steph
this
belief.
is just Steph. This is from my experiences, my lived experiences, and what happened. I do not believe that there is healing together in an abusive relationship. I do not believe it. I'm willing to be wrong. I'm not saying that this is true for you, but it's true for me. So I don't talk about healing together in an abusive, in a violent relationship. I do not. I would help somebody and have helped get out of those violent relationships. I have found a way to liberate myself from violent relationships. There may be healing in them. I haven't seen it, even if the violence has stopped in the relationship, which is rare, which is incredibly rare. I haven't seen that turn into a healthy relationship, into a safe relationship. My personal belief is when there is violence in a relationship, healing can only be done separate. So I'm definitely not speaking when I'm coming like working together and healing together, and the work that you do together is critical to healing together, and both of you take an accountability. I am speaking to that when mistakes have been made, because if you're in a relationship and you are a human, you have made mistakes in the relationship, and so is your partner. I am speaking to the accountability that you both have to take for yourselves and the way that you both have to show up in relationships. I am speaking to that. But when it comes to violence, it is not my belief that there is healing to be done there together. Both people and everyone involved needs a tremendous amount of healing. It needs a tremendous amount of help. Whether you were the violent person, whether you were the victim, whether you are the witness, all of these things that come through, there's so much help that is needed and so much healing that is needed. But healing together in that space, for me, I don't believe it. And that's like, okay, if we have all these people that are going to disagree with that, that's okay. I'm saying for
I feel
me.
like the majority of people are going to
Yeah.
agree with that, right? I think that, I mean, I definitely agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't think that the time to try to come together and work on the relationship is when there's active abuse
Yeah.
involved. And I think you're right. I think the likelihood of two people being able to navigate that process in a healthy, safe way is very, very low. But again, it needs to be said that even though that's not necessarily our intention with that actual post, and we didn't give a disclaimer on it, there wasn't anything in the caption. Like what I read earlier is what the post read once
Right.
we shared it. And we don't give a lot of disclaimers to the content that we share simply because, yeah, I mean, I think the reality is there's a bunch of different things here. If we went through the process of trying to imagine what every single person is going to interpret our content as, and then try to guess at that ahead of time in order to create a disclaimer, like it's just not reasonable, right? It's just not something that we're able to do. If we know ahead of time, like if this podcast, we were going to talk specifically about domestic violence and abuse and really get into the weeds of a topic like that, then we would very much disclaimer ahead of time going into the podcast episode. All the content that we would create coming from that would definitely have some disclaimers attached to it. But just regular everyday content that we create, we're not adding a ton of disclaimers to, because just from a logistical standpoint, it's kind of really challenging to do so. And you think, well, it's not really hard to copy and paste some text in there. And you'd be right. That's not a challenging, difficult thing to do. And that wouldn't add a ton of like, quote unquote, work. But I don't think everything needs a disclaimer. I don't think that everything that gets shared out there in social media needs a disclaimer. And this really brought up a lot of stuff for us to process and talk about. And that's another bigger thing too, where first and foremost, like you were saying, babe, every comment that was made on that post is valid. Everybody's experience is valid. I'm not coming at it from the perspective of like, we are free from any wrongdoing, or like your processing of the content. I mean, literally, this is social media in general, right? It's not just our Facebook page and what we've shared on Facebook, but everything that you consume is going to be coming through your filters at that given moment and that given day. And who's to guess what that is like, right? I want to talk about this as genuinely as we can. And as we're starting to get into it, I'm just sitting here thinking about, I don't want this to come off like we're trying to defend something, because I'm not trying to defend what we've done. I don't think we did anything wrong. I think we just posted something on Facebook and it sparked something in people that upset them. And then they expressed it, which I'm really grateful for.
It's almost like, if I'm getting this right, it's almost like we would say like, yes, you're absolutely right. This does not apply to violence, doesn't apply to narcissistic, scary relationships. You're right, it doesn't. We weren't speaking to that kind of relationship. We were speaking to healthy relationships. We were speaking to relationships that where two people are actively working on each other and are safe, may make mistakes. There may be hurts, but there's not violence. Like it doesn't apply to that. You're right. If somebody reads it from that term, you're right, it's hurtful. That's not who we were talking to. And that's not who, like, our target audience is, I guess. And I say that's not who we're reaching out to. There's so much work that needs to be done there, but we just weren't talking to that. So it's you're right. that doesn't fit. And that would be really hurtful if that's who we were talking to. And for the people that heard that, that felt like that's who we're talking to, we're not. Like, we're so sorry that that hurt. It's not your fault. It is not your fault. You do deserve to be safe. And I hope that you get help and get out of that relationship. And I know you do as well. And for people that aren't in that type of relationship, that are in a safe relationship with their partner, that are trying to heal through the things that are coming up in their life, that are healing through the shadow, that are healing through the things that are human, come up in relationships of where your partner has hurt the relationship and where you have hurt the relationship. It's both of you bringing stuff and both of you needing to work together to come out. If it's just one person, like it's never one person. Again, not talking about violence, not talking about violence. It is never the person's fault who is being victimized, who is being violated. And we're just not speaking to that. We're speaking to the other types of relationships. So it's really hard because it's like, we see you, you're right. That's not what this post was, though. This isn't the context that we're speaking, and this isn't the message that we're giving. You heard that. You're absolutely right. That doesn't fit. And that's not what we were, not a you that's not what we were saying. We're not like, how would I say this? Like, this isn't the audience we were talking to. Does that kind of make sense? Like, this isn't the audience we were talking to in this sense. And the only thing that I would say there is we hope you get to safety.
Yeah.
Does that kind of feel like what you were saying
It does.
a little
And
bit?
like, it's the whole thing of just not wanting to make anybody feel bad.
Yeah.
And the reality is it's impossible to not do that, right?
Yeah. We
The
can't
reality
disclaimer
is,
everything.
Yeah. People are going to feel bad. They're going to have their feelings hurt. They're going to see something online that sparks them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the bigger thing that I wanted to talk about is we have like almost 100,000 followers on Facebook, and that has reached a certain level where it requires a lot of interaction and engagement. And I think a lot of people assume that like at some point people have other people doing their social media, and a lot of people do, right? There's a lot of content creators and people online that have teams of people. You know, it's not like everybody is sitting there on their own phones talking to people. We don't. Like, one of the things that we really actually enjoy is all of the engagement and all of the interaction and everything that goes on with it. And that's kind of like the bigger scope of what's happening is we've also viewed this whole experiment of social media and everything that's going on in the world and us being able to actively kind of participate in it through this other kind of, it's like a yogic lens of it becomes the work. So we are a mere Steph and Craig show. We're just showing up and sharing with you our lived experience of healing together and what that's looked like in our life and in our relationship. And we put it up online for everybody to look at and see in hopes that you see some part of yourself in it. And what we're talking about, you relate to. What we go through, you've gone through. What's worked for us might spark something for you. So it's this whole mirroring thing that takes place. And I think it's really beautiful. I think that it's kind of one of the most incredible things that we've created as humans is this opportunity to be able to use this as a skill set to reach such a broader audience so that we can all mirror for each other back and forth and learn from each other. And we do the same, not just with the content that we consume, but also in this engagement and interaction with people. So when we started to get some pushback on this post, it creates activation inside of us. Suddenly we're trying to figure out what it means, right? Suddenly we're starting to look at it through a different lens and trying to see, wait, did we mess up here? Did we do something wrong? Is there some room for growth? So it created this really unique opportunity for us to also just go through and really start reflecting on what it sparks and what it brings up. And it did. And it did for several days.
Several days.
Where it was kind of like continually getting triggered and activated by what people were saying about this post. And there's some things that stood out, some stuff that we've talked about already, but one of the sayings that we really like as well is that one person's poison is another person's medicine. And so oftentimes there's information or there's something that you'll see online that not only doesn't resonate for you, but might actually really trigger you and hurt you, or where you're at in life and how you're seeing it and how you're viewing it. And that exact same piece of content might be the thing that really helps somebody in the moment, or, you know, they see it at a time in their life where they really needed a push or a nudge to make a change or to shift up something in their life. And I'm not saying that this piece of content in particular was some sort of life-changing experience for people, but it's just highlighting that dynamic where what might help somebody in this moment might actually hurt somebody in whatever moment they're in. And we also take that into consideration with what we share, because not everything that we share is for everybody. Not everything that we share is going to not only not resonate with everybody, but it's some stuff that, like, truthfully, a lot of our content is relationship based, and not a lot of people have healthy, super beautiful relationships. We didn't for a really long time. Our relationship has gone through many evolutions of health and well-being. And that's part of why we are sharing the content that we share, because we want to help people create better relationships, because it's been so impactful for us. So a lot of people that I'm sure are consuming the content that we put out there aren't in the healthiest, best relationships, you know, and I don't know how to, like, that's just the reality. And the hope is that some of the things that we do share inspire you to work on your relationship if it's safe to do so, you know, all of those type of things. But I do want to say that it is important that we are aware, or at least we believe, right? It doesn't matter what you believe. What you believe does matter. I'm not saying that. But we're aware of that mirroring effect that's taking place. And so when we get triggered by something online, even if it's in our own comments of a post that we shared, that is also work for us. And we don't just shake it off and ignore it. It's an opportunity to really lean in and actually look and work on what that's bringing up and triggering inside of us. And like I said, we did that this week. We took an honest look at, was this post hurtful? Was the scope of it hurtful? Were we going after people? Were we saying, you know, things that were hurtful? And we don't think we were. Some people saw it through a lens and where they're at, and that's totally fine. And we also do our best to kind of cultivate a space where people can engage about things. There's obviously times where we have to block people and whatnot, but that wasn't the case this time. It was just hearing what people had to say and creating a space where people feel safe enough to express and communicate when they don't feel like something is right. And I think we accomplished that. I hope we accomplished that. But yeah, I don't want to get too much further into, like, I feel like all we're doing is being like, we didn't do anything wrong. We're trying to, you know, so in lieu of trying to not do that anymore, there is another part that I want to make sure and talk about. But before we switch up, I want to see if there's anything else that you want to say, babe.
Well, I don't know if I do have a lot to say, but we might just be, I might jump to the track that you were going to, but I might be continuing this conversation, but that's okay because I have a lot to say too. I think,
you keep bumping into your mic.
do I?
Yeah. So
Sorry.
you're okay.
Can't help it.
Steph's packing.
Bam. What do you want?
You're cute. That's what happened when you moved to Tennessee.
Right?
Immediately, if you move to Tennessee, you get Dolly breasts. That's just the way it goes. They hand out a set of Dolly Partons when you cross the border.
Right. It's right.
It's a Tennessee perk.
That's like, who knew that was going to pop up here, but they keep pushing the mic back. So, I've even got them like strapped down in a sports bra. I'm not even wearing a kapow. I'm wearing it and it's still, so it's okay. It's okay. All right. Hey, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending your time with us, listening to the podcast. We know there's a lot of options out there and you're choosing your time with us, and we're so grateful that you are. Would you do us a favor? Would you subscribe to this podcast, share it, and write us a review? This helps us build the podcast. This helps us reach more and more people, and we have a goal of reaching over 1 million people. So any amount of engagement that you do really helps us achieve that. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. We're so grateful to you. We're so excited that you're choosing to share your journey with us and listen to a part of ours. Let's get back to the show. So, some of the things that came up for me, first of all, like one of the things that I had to look at was intense defensiveness. I was feeling like defensive, and for a lot of different reasons. It was we had the episode with Josh Conley. That one's aired.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's aired. Where he talked about like how social media, it's like it's really confusing and it's hard to navigate when people are responding to something that you didn't, and it was like, that wasn't, we weren't speaking. So it's hard. So I felt very misunderstood. And like, I was like, how did we make that jump? And the first thing that I went to is self-criticism and punishment, because like, this is why I used to not be able to have a conversation, and I still struggle with this without a million disclaimers, without a million, just like, and not only just like on the podcast, we have these things, but like just our conversations together.
Yeah, even
or
me
if
and
I
you.
go to me and you, if I go to say something to somebody, I feel so scared to speak, and have been like, so much punishment has come from speak that it was like, let me please tell you all the things that I'm not saying before I feel safe enough to say that I want a glass of water.
Right.
Right.
We
to
do
say
that so many times
you
where
are
here's
like,
all the caveats.
it's not that you're not giving me water. It's not all of these things, all of the caveats. I feel like it takes me like 10 minutes going through caveats before I get to the tiniest thing, which is an opinion or a need or my voice, right? Just the tiniest thing. So that kind of like sparked that in me, because it's been a lot of work to stop giving excuses of why I'm speaking, to stop punishing myself before I speak, to stop trying to earn the right to speak before I do all of these things. And so it's something that I still struggle with and I'm still working on. And that grabbed me, even though it just came up and it was like, hey, like, wait a minute. We weren't talking there. Like, I don't like, wait a minute. That's not what we were saying. It brought up my first reaction of that fight back, in a sense of like, that's not what I'm saying. Don't put words into my mouth. Don't try and change it to fit your narrative. And that really like strong pushback where I was afraid, like that fear, and had to kind of like, when I first started seeing those comments popping off, I was so surprised. And then I had to put my phone down. Like, okay, I can't engage in any of these at this moment, because it was such a rock. And then I was seeing their point. I was like, yeah, that would. So it's just like my work on that was, I have to be able to, for me, right? You have your work for there. But for me, is like, I have to be able to hear and like, yeah, you're right. I see how that made you feel that way, but not take on what actually isn't. Like, if it was something that I didn't, like an ignorance thing, that we were like, said something horrible and we were speaking, that we didn't have enough like insight on that. Like, this is a stupid, association here. It's not even the same thing, and I recognize that, but it's the only thing my brain can come up with right now. It's like, we used to say disassociation instead of dissociation, and we got corrected on that, and it was like, you're right.
I think you're saying all of those wrong still.
Probably, but it was like
dissociate versus disassociate.
disassociate. Am I still saying them wrong?
I don't know.
Are you just being funny?
No. It's one of those that I haven't been able to remember either.
Yeah.
And when
I
we
think
talk
I've got
about
it.
it still, when we share something or say it in a reel, then I'm just like, don't know if I said that right.
It's so it's like that. It's a very like two different ends of the spectrum, and I recognize that. But if oh, okay, I'm willing to correct something that is wrong. And I'm willing to say, this is actually what I'm speaking about. I hear that that's your point of view, but what I'm speaking to is this. I'm not invalidating you, but also this is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. And being able to keep like saying what I want to say, my voice, your voice. I feel like this is our real, but I can only speak to about like my experience here. Like you have to speak about yours and what you were coming up with. So if I'm sounding very much me, it's just I'm trying to not speak for you. So that was a lot of work with that, and to say, yeah, that's not what we're saying though. And that's not, but it doesn't change the fact that that's what was hurtful. I don't
Yeah,
know.
no,
It's so
it was such a
confusing.
little wonky like thought experiment that we went through, and
Yeah.
like this opportunity to, because I think a lot of people were, in the comments, it was very clear that they were either wanting us to take it down or
Mhm.
wanting us to change it.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's the other thing, right? I said earlier where it can be both,
Mm-hmm.
where I didn't say that earlier. I just said that now. What I said earlier was one person's medicine is another person's poison,
Mm-hmm.
and two people can be right at the same time.
I think there's an episode about that.
I think there is. I think we did an episode of the podcast
Yeah.
about it. But that's the whole thing that it kept coming up, was it's like they're right, or
Mhm.
the individual person that's commenting, right? I
Yeah.
don't want to lump everybody together, but some of the people, they're right. Those everything that they were expressing was right, and also we were right in what we were expressing. And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
Like, this is a bigger issue, I feel, when it comes to content online and when it comes to social media. And you see it all the time too, where it's like, if you don't agree with something, then just keep
Scroll by.
scrolling.
Yeah.
If it triggers you and upsets you to the point where you're wanting to engage in the comments down below, I think, over the years, I've got this relationship with social media where I look at it through that lens of like, if something sparks something inside of me enough to where I want to comment on it, that is something that I should look at even more. That is something that is triggering me in such a way that I should look at it even more, right? I should sit with what is coming up for me. I should sit with why I'm triggered by it. I should sit with the part of me that is activated.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my choice. That's my work. That's what I choose to do. I'm not saying everybody should do that. But I think that in this case, and especially, the people that were activated by this, I think it's an opportunity to look at why. What about this was so triggering? And what about your experiences, brought up? What did it bring up for you? I think is a really good opportunity. And also just the acknowledgement of like, your lived experience isn't my lived experience. Your truth isn't my truth. I don't have to alter and change how I move through the world based off of your lived experience, right? I get to have my lived experience. And so it's this weird wonky dance that everybody's trying to do in life and in society and in, relationships, where does where is the line between accommodating everybody else, but at the same time also speaking up for yourself? And, it's boundary work. There's so many different little nuanced parts of this. So that's what a lot of this was like looking at for me, was we didn't do anything wrong, yet we weren't, all encompassing with who we were kind of, I don't know. But those are some other things that brought up for me. Sorry, I got squirrely there in what I was trying to communicate.
No, you're good. You're not squirrely. This is like, there's part of me that honestly, like, why not speak to it? There's part of me that's like, okay, I'm kind of
Speak
like,
to what?
there's a part of me that's coming up right now, and it's like I have walked that walk. Like, I know what it's like to be the person who is getting blamed for violence. I know what it's like to be the one that thinks like, "Hey, don't say it's my fault." Like I am like a lifelong until our relationship. I'm not a stranger. It's hard for me to say it right now because I don't even know what words to say, which is funny. Like, I have experienced extreme domestic violence until my 30s. That's 30 years of having it in my life.
Yeah.
Of being the receiver and witnessing it happening to the people that I love and having it happen to me. I'm like, this is a space that I have a seat at the table. I have a seat at the table on what this experience is. And there's this part of me that's coming up right now it's almost feeling like that super apologetic. And I'm kind of like, I'm okay to trigger people. Like, I'm okay to say hard things. I'm okay. Like, you don't have to like me. You don't have to like me. You don't have to like the podcast. You don't have to like us. You don't have to resonate with us. That's okay. Because we're not supposed to resonate with everybody. We're just not supposed to. And when it comes to healthy relationships, the truth is that if that's what you want, it takes both of you working hard. It takes both of you. It's not just one person. And maybe that's an unpopular opinion. Again, caveat, here we go. I'm not talking about domestic violence. I'm not talking about abuse. I'm not talking about violence, period. I'm not talking about assault. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about when you were in a relationship and you were committed to making it work because maybe you're fucking up, but nobody is physically hurting anybody. I'm talking to you that it takes both of you. It takes work to get into it. You have actions in your shadow and your past that you were bringing in, as do they. And it is coming together and it is creating beautifulness. It is creating this loving relationship. It is creating the safety and it is creating chaos. And it is like crossing lines and it is creating things that need to be healed from. And if you only look at your partner and say, this would be better if you did this. This would be better if you fix this, if you stop doing this, that everything would be fine as long as if you would fix all of these things, that is not going to heal your relationship. Ask me how I know. Good majority of this, I was just waiting for Craig to fix his shit. Right? Also, we didn't have to recover from a violent relationship.
Yeah,
we
ask
did not
me
have,
how I know. I love that.
We didn't have a violent relationship. And I bought, what?
Go ahead.
I brought baggage from violent relationships, from fear, from all of this shit into this relationship, and I projected it onto him. He also brought his own baggage. He had to take radical accountability and quit waiting for me and all of my baggage to fix so we could have a healthy relationship. Ask him how he knows, right?
Well, that's the whole point behind the original post, right? It's every single problem in your relationship took both of you to create and will take both of you to solve. So I want to unpack that even more.
Okay, let's do it because I'm ready to unpack it.
Hopefully we've gotten through the part of the episode where it's like acknowledging that this sparked some things in people and you're right in that. And we don't want to just push past that. But from this different perspective, so like you said, your relationships prior to our relationship were very abusive and difficult and challenging, and you've navigated all of those things.
Yeah.
And you're at a point now where you're at this relationship.
I'm at this relationship.
Right. And we've been together for over a decade, and our relationship is very chaotic in the beginning years and very stressful and very challenging and very hard. And we both brought all of our baggage to the relationship, right? All of our good and all of our bad. And we mixed it all up in a nice little martini shaker. And then
we called it a family.
And now we're trying to unpack all of those things. And we spent a large chunk of our relationship in the beginning, right? Thinking that it was, because I thought the same thing. I thought that it was your fault. I thought everything was your problem. I thought as soon as Stephanie starts fixing her shit and starts addressing things, then we'll start taking care of all of these problems in our relationship. So we spent a long time just thinking that the other person was the issue and that we weren't.
I didn't think that. I knew that.
Right?
I knew you were the problem. Right? How shitty is that? That's like the part of why this is like.
See, this is the thing where like two people can be true at the same time. Because the reality is I was the problem.
And I was the problem.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, I was the
That's
problem.
the truth of it, where I think a lot of times statements like the one that we're talking about that got people triggered and upset is there's always going to be some component of truth to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the stories and the things that we tell ourselves where I'm like, well, Stephanie's the problem. Yeah, Stephanie is the problem. Stephanie wasn't dealing with her stuff. Stephanie wasn't addressing her issues. She wasn't, that's very much truth. So I have that part of myself, that narrative, the ego, everything inside of me that's like, see, yes, yes, yes. And at the same time, Craig, equally amount of issues and
Right.
problems that he was not addressing and or facing or willing to look at, that was creating a lot of problems in our relationship. Now, if I just go on my own journey and try to fix all of my problems, and I'm still trying to maintain a relationship with you, at some point, like, the balancing scale of problems, I start addressing more and taking care of more, and you don't, eventually that relationship gets off kilter and it doesn't work.
That was also something that we both thought was happening
Right.
for us
Multiple
individually.
times.
I'm working on stuff. He's not. You're working on stuff. I'm not. I'm taking it serious. I'm willing to look at the hard stuff. All you're willing to do is project, vice versa. We kept the same dynamics while healing
Over and
because
over.
it's a journey.
Yeah.
Like it takes.
And we're still doing it, probably.
Still doing it.
I know I catch
I mean,
myself.
I'm working on stuff. I don't know what you're doing.
Right. Hey, I've healed
Right.
X, Y, and Z over here. What are you up to over there? Right. It's just part of life.
Yeah.
And so the purpose of that post was to just remind people, like, you each come to the table here. You each have created this relationship that you're in, right? We did it. We created all of our shit together. Now, did we have stuff that we brought from previous lives and previous relationships and obviously the time before we met? Absolutely. And I think that those things also obviously play a role in the problems that get created in the relationship. But it really took both of us actively working on ourselves and actively working on our relationship before any of those problems started to change. Prior to that, it was just the continual spiral of chaos, which we were very accustomed to from our lives before, right? That was the norm. So of course, nothing was getting fixed. But that was the impetus for the post, was just the reminder that it's like, hey, if you're over there pointing fingers at your partner, that whole thing. I love we saw this one recently where it was, if you're pointing a finger at somebody, you got four fingers. You got four penises pointing back at you, right? One finger pointed at you. I got four pointed back at me, something like that.
Yeah.
And then the lady was like pointing all of her fingers. I love it. But yeah, it took both of us, and it's ongoing and continual. That's always going to be the story. Mm-hmm. That story doesn't change.
It doesn't. It doesn't change. And I think one of the things that people get confused is when you're taking accountability for yourself and your actions in the relationship, you're not taking, like when you both got yourselves there and it's going to take both of you to get it out, it's not saying that you are responsible for your partner's behaviors as much as they are not responsible for yours. However, the dynamic and the energy that you are bringing to the relationship is you are responsible for. Your behaviors and actions, you're responsible for. The energy that you are bringing, the connection you are bringing. Now, you can't do it all yourself. That is true. You cannot do it all yourself. As you were starting to say, I think before I interrupted on one part, is that if there's only one of you that really is willing to do the work and as one of you are doing it, there's, maybe the other partner is going to start to grow with you and maybe you're going to grow apart and the relationship's going to go, because as much as one person can't break it, one person can't fix it. It takes both of you. Hope we've caveated enough that we're not talking about violence here. But one of the things is that I would blame my responses on your behaviors too.
What do you mean?
And I couldn't possibly regulate myself when you were still behaving so horribly, I guess. I don't know how to say it. Like as long as you were causing problems in our relationship, I had, which was one of my mechanisms, the excuse to not do my part. because I was too busy trying to,
Like you got to play clean up, and like your responses were valid
my response,
because of what I was doing.
right? Because of what you're doing, because of play cleanup, because I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't do the things that I needed to do to maintain mine because
Too busy cleaning
I
up
was too
after
busy
Craig.
cleaning up and covering for, and all of these just like different things that had to come up, which those were the tools that I had at the time. And the tools that I have now says it's actually, and oh, and the other part, right, is like I knew deep down in my like shame that it was my fault, which is why another reason I was projecting it was my fault for your behaviors.
Mm.
If I could just be better, then we wouldn't have the problems that we were having. But that was harder. So I would shame myself and not do the work on myself, or I would exhaust myself and not being able to. All of this just kept being full of excuses of why I wasn't healing, why I wasn't working on me. And at the time, yeah, they were valid. They were valid because I didn't have the tools. And then when I started getting the tools, I didn't know how to use the tools. So they were valid until I started to separate from that story, from that narrative. And regardless of what you were doing, started to work on myself, started to like really make shifts within myself and start to show up in our relationship as me, as opposed to a reaction to you. Also, that was a program that I had. Everything had to be a reaction towards. So it just goes so layers and layers and layers and layers. Now, none of this is saying that I deserved any negative behaviors. Now, Grant, I'm just speaking for me. Don't sit over here and think that I'm just this little innocent thing and Craig didn't have shit to deal with. Okay. He's got his own version of this. But this is just for me on this part. And it was really challenging to realize the role that I was playing. I wasn't responsible for your behaviors, but I was responsible for half of the relationship having issues. I was responsible for my portion of what I was giving, and I had to shift my behaviors, my beliefs, my patterns, my communication, my everything that was just like the way that I would project out. I had to shift that. I had to start taking accountability, and it didn't change your behaviors. It didn't mean that what was happening wasn't happening. It wasn't saying that, oh, now I'm gaslighting myself. This isn't happening or it's all my fault. It was very much but this is what I'm doing for me now. This is how I'm showing up, and start to build my building blocks. And I don't know what your situation was like. I don't, but like it feels like for me, what I saw is that you really started taking accountability for your behaviors, your actions, the way, the energy that you were bringing. Maybe I'm wrong, and I would love to hear your side of it, but I feel like we both had to really ground in of what ours was actually ours and how we were coming together in that space. What does
I
that
agree
feel
completely.
like? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that's one of the really big key things is, I mean, it's one thing to acknowledge that like two people make all these problems, you know, two people are creating a relate or multiple people if you've got multiple people in your
Right.
relationship, right? There's always that caveat where we talk a lot about this thing from our lived experience. But the reality too is you can have awareness that your problems are creating these problems, right? Your issues are creating these issues. But until you really start taking accountability for what those things are, nothing will change. And that's where the big change started to really take place for both of us, is when we both started taking accountability. Because it wasn't just Craig starts dealing with his shit and taking accountability for his actions and starts trying to be responsible. You had to also, right? And part of taking accountability, I think, at least for me, was really looking at my actions and the ramifications of the choices that I've made and sitting in the truth of those things for myself. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. I know that I did. I still do. Because when you sit with the accountability of what things, like when you sit in the accountability of your choices and your actions, you see the truth of those things, at least to your lenses and your perspective, right? And there's some really hard truths that some people have to sit with, myself included, right? Where it's really uncomfortable acknowledging your role in things, even if those things were abuse, even if those things were like, do you know what I mean? This is one of those, like, this is one where I'd spend the next 15 minutes trying to throw a bunch of caveats so that it didn't come off the right way. But from my lens and my perspective, we all play a role in the things that happen to us, even when those things that happen to us aren't within our control. And what I mean by that is from a much bigger perspective. I'm not talking about it from a very, it's going from like a very zoomed in lived experience of somebody who has been a victim. Like, I'll speak for myself personally, right? I've been a victim of abuse and violence. And I'm not saying this from the perspective of, I think that I played a role in that, or that my actions and choices caused that abuse and violence, right? And I'm not saying that in regards for other people who also have experienced abuse, where your actions and choices are the cause of that. I'm not saying that from a zoomed in perspective of a lived experience of a person going through it in the moment. But I believe, and again, here we are, my perspective, my belief, my programming, where I'm at currently in my life, that if I look at my life and I zoom out a little bit further, and I zoom out a little bit further, and I zoom out a little bit further, I can see very much how my choices and actions contributed to the abuse that I experienced. Hey, you, thank you for listening to the podcast. We really appreciate it. We set a goal for ourselves that we want to reach over 1 million people on YouTube. And truthfully, we're going to need your help to get there. So if you haven't yet, head over to YouTube and subscribe to the Steph Craig Show. And be sure to click that notification button so that you get a little ding every time we release a new episode. We're really grateful that you chose to listen to our podcast, and we hope that you're enjoying this episode. Now let's get back to it. And I think on an even bigger scale, and now we're like out into the space of like beliefs about what this whole fucking shit show of a world life experience is all about. I think that I chose to experience certain things in my life for the lived experience of the emotional evolution, do you know what I mean? Like the spiritual evolution of me as a human, or as me as a spirit, or me as an entity of whatever. And so that's my lens and my perspective, is that we always play a role in regards to what takes place in our life, even when those things are things that we don't want to have played a role in. Does that make sense? Am I articulating that in a way that makes, because I'm talking about much headier, kind of like esoteric things now. I'm not talking about the lived experience of a human being. It's like this higher perspective. And I'm not saying that it's the right perspective. I'm saying it's my view and my perspective, where I believe that we all play a role in the problems that we create, because those are the problems that we needed created in our life in order for us to perpetually heal and evolve. I think it's all about that. I think it's all about the evolution process. I think it's all about us healing. And you can look at it from like the yogic perspective and samskaras and the reincarnation and all of these other kind of things, right? We're continually trying to remember that we're unconditionally loved. Like the goal of incarnating into a body is to remember that you're part of love, and it's the unconscious, unconditional love that everything spins and vibrates and creates all matter. So we incarnate into this body to remind ourselves that we're worthy of unconditional love. And then that journey looks like, how many things can I put in my path to make me like question that? There's so many things that can happen to a person that will get them further and further and further away from feeling like they're worthy of unconditional love. And then the work becomes getting back to that place. And the reality is you don't ever have to go anywhere. You're always there, right? I'm always worthy of unconditional love, no matter what's happened to me or what's taken place. So I think I play a role in creating all of these problems in my life, even those problems that would be really easy to look at as somebody else's 100% choices and actions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you went very spiritual. And that's like, that makes sense. I understand that some people aren't going to be there. Some people are very much, and that's
Yeah.
okay. You don't have to be. For me, it does. Like when I look at, like, just if I was to circle back to one part of it is like where we forgot we were unconditionally loved, and we're trying to get back to that. And then my, the part of me, I don't even know what part of me, I don't even know what I would call it. Like some of us didn't learn along the way that we were like, didn't have to learn along the way that maybe we weren't unconditionally loved and have to go back to it. Some of us, a lot of us never like had any other message. Like from the get-go, we were very much like unconditional love wasn't something that, was experienced.
I think that's the majority of the world.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's the majority of people,
So
which is sad.
It is sad. So I would just like, I don't know, maybe I did get a little lost actually. I'm trying to circle it back around, but honestly, I think I'm a little, maybe it's because I'm activated, but I'm a little lost in right now.
Well, it's like, for me, it's that because it's a really uncomfortable truth. I don't like sitting there thinking that I've contributed to the abuse that I've experienced.
Well, also, like, that's not something that you go to right away.
What do you mean?
Like, that isn't, when you were working through healing from abuse that you've experienced, when you were working through the steps, when you were like understanding the part of you that, and whether it was like because it was a program that you've had since infancy and that you never had any other thing, or whether it's something that you learned in high school or you learned at any point in your life, like you don't jump to how is it your fault,
Very much.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
You don't do that. And that's probably the space that most people start in, but not from a healthy way. From a, oh, of course it's my fault. Of course, if I would have just been better, they wouldn't, if we go to the violence, they wouldn't hit me if I did do this, if I didn't make them mad, all of these things. That is not the time. That is the time when you are like, you've got to flip that judgment and be like, they are doing this.
Yes.
This was their fault. This was not my fault. This was their choices.
That's so important to bring up.
That's what I'm like really, really honing in on. This is not time for you to take accountability for your actions when you're in that spot. When you're talking
Yes.
about the abuse, it is
Yeah,
not
there's
the
like
time.
levels of healing that take
Right?
place. And a part of healing when you're a victim is being able to use your voice.
Yes.
To start creating safety and security around you, start to be able to point out when things aren't safe, starting to be able to call out the abuser. All of those things are like super important and levels of healing that take place.
And it can be like, it doesn't have to be extreme violence either. It can be like very like unhealthy dynamics in a relationship, all the way to saying, this is not okay with me. I'm not participating in this longer. These are behaviors that you need to address.
Yeah.
They are not my fault.
And all of those are really important stages of like the healing process, right? And for me, I've gone through and am going through and continually navigating a stage of growth and healing for myself where I'm looking at, because I can't say that two things can be true if I'm not willing to sit with that, meaning that their truth is also real. So if there's somebody that holds a truth that I disagree with, I have to be willing to sit in that space and at least entertain that truth is real.
It's real for them. It doesn't have to be real for you.
Correct.
Yes.
So that means that people that have abused me but don't see it that way or don't think of it that way, I have to also be willing to sit in that. Or people that would think that I am the person that's contributing to abuse by my actions and my choices. I might disagree with that, but I have to be willing to sit in the uncomfortableness of, well, maybe they're right.
Yeah.
So it's constantly being able to go back and forth between looking at there's truths in all things and there's also not. Right. It's really about the person's perspective and where they're at.
That's kind of, I just want to say real fast, because where you were saying of like, you're looking at your role. That was like my thing of like, this isn't where you start.
Yeah.
Like this takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of separation from the environment. It takes a lot of healing. It takes a lot of help. It takes a lot of therapy before you can start to look at that in a healthy way that doesn't perpetuate the same shame cycle that puts you back in a space of like, so that was just my thing of like, what you were feeling is absolutely valid. And you looking at your role in life. And so you stop creating these patterns. So you're able to live, but that doesn't come first. And if you hear that first,
it's
then
super
very
hurtful.
much you're like, what? Like
I remember hearing stuff, along the way, and I know you can relate to this as well, but there's plenty of times when we're trying to like navigate this journey of healing and you'll hear stuff that you're like, fuck off. Like that doesn't, not only do I not resonate with that, but that's bullshit, right? There's these parts of like the healing journey and the healing process where you have to be able to use your voice and communicate and express and speak out when things don't feel right. And I think that's massively important. And I think that's what was taking place on Facebook with this post was people speaking out and saying, this isn't right. And I'm like, yes, I'm so grateful that on our little Facebook page, we've created enough of a space where people feel like they can do that. And we don't come back with defensive. We don't come back with arguing. We don't come back and block you immediately. Like we encourage people to not agree with everything that we say. And by all means, let us know when you don't agree with what we say, right? Because it's a beautiful dance that we all get to take place and take part in of learning and healing together. And that's the thing where it's like being willing to sit in the discomfort of, even if that's the other really big thing that came for me in this experience was because we're talking about this where it's like this mirroring that takes place, right? So I have to sit with the judgment and criticism of somebody thinks that we're wrong. Somebody thinks that I'm wrong, right? And they get to. I'm not going to be right all the time. Also, not everybody is going to agree with everything that I say. It's kind of what you were saying earlier, right? And they don't have to. But then I have a wounded little inner child inside of me whose responsibility it was to keep people safe, or who was programmed to think that that was their responsibility. And in the process of that programming of that little child that's inside of me, another message that they got was that their thoughts or actions better not ever hurt anybody or upset anybody. And if they do, then they need to fix that immediately, right? And apologize and correct. So I have really, really built-in people-pleasing skills that I used for a very long time in order to keep me safe. So suddenly we have people online on Facebook who are upset and want us to do something about it. And I had to look at that part of me that wanted to immediately correct it, wanted to immediately fix it, wanted to immediately apologize, immediately like backpedal and replace and delete and fix and caveat and do everything in order to make somebody else feel better who was dysregulated by something that we said, by something that we shared. So then I get to heal or sit with that part of me that is like, oh, we can't sit here and hold still when somebody else is dysregulated and upset by something that I said. I can fix this immediately, right? It's the same thing that we struggle with as parents, where we don't ever want to be the cause of hurting our children with something that we said or our actions. And sometimes we do. And then we just have to sit there and let them be hurt and be in pain, right? It's the same thing between you and me. I never want to upset you. I never want to hurt you. I never want to cause you pain. And then when I do, I just have to deal with it sometimes. I'm not saying like, well, sucks to be Steph. I just said something, right? Of course, there's this big caveat that it's like, change your actions, right? I'm not saying don't change anything if you're hurting your partner's feelings. Like there's plenty of times where I need to course correct and change my behavior and my actions. And then there's unfortunately just times where stuff happens and your feelings are going to get hurt. And there's nothing to be done about it other than just be in the discomfort of it all together, right? Like there's honest mistakes that happen and that's okay. And I think that's a really important part of kind of learning how to navigate healing, not only together, but also just like there's a part of this whole thing too, where the world is a very uncomfortable place to be in. It's not a place that's full of like joy and happiness and love all the time. However, I really do think it is. I think it's a perspective shift. And part of being able to sit in the joy and the happiness and the love all the time is being able to also sit in the grief and the sadness and the discomfort and all of those things at the same time as well. I think it's important for all of us to be able to learn how to sit in both of those things, those two polar opposites, love and joy, as well as grief and sadness, simultaneously, being able to hold those two things at the same time. That's been a lot of what my work has been lately, is being able to sit in that discomfort at the same time, rather than get so hyper-focused on, this is making me mad, it better be fixed and changed so that I'm not mad anymore, or I'm really happy right now, nothing get in the way of my happiness, right?
It's really hard.
Those two things are always going to coexist simultaneously.
Yeah.
And we just have to be able to feel it and navigate it.
Yeah. I think it's also like you can be rocking this and sitting with both and really being able to look at that in one area. That doesn't mean that you're killing it in every area of your life. Like you can be like suddenly the dishes, right, are the thing that you're like, it's a dance, and you're just really trying to figure it out along the way. And so it's like a lot of times too, we get this this perfectionism. So this people pleasing comes with perfectionism. Is we're trying to heal this spot, we're trying to be able to see it, we're trying to sit in both spots, we're trying to sit in discomfort, but it might be in this area. It doesn't mean that we can do it in every place at once. And I mean, if you can, I can't. If you can, like, I'm not like, good for you. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying that's a skill I don't have yet. I am still balancing, and there's areas of my life where I'm really healthy and I can really see, and I'm coming from self energy, and I can see other people so beautifully. And then I have other areas of my life where I cannot see it from both sides. I'm very much still wounded, very much still hurting, and have to like really protect that part and lash out. Like it just depends on where you're at in different levels. Like I'm a human.
Right.
Like
I think that's another
fluctuate.
important thing to say too, right? Because earlier we're talking like this is a different level of healing, and there's no judgment. Like if you're at this phase of healing, that doesn't mean that you're any less because somebody might be it's not even to say it's a higher phase of healing or anything like that, right? It's just a different.
Yeah.
And you'll be at different levels in regards to different things. And so you might be knocking it out of the park in regards, we think about it a lot of times from it's this lens of like different relationships. Like you and me, this relationship, we're at a really high level of healing, because you and me are showing up and participating about it on a regular basis, committed to the process. But in another relationship, it's nowhere near that level of healing. And that's partially due to the fact that, like if I think about the relationship that I have with my dad, we're not operating at a really high level.
Yeah.
Right. And that's partially because he's not there showing up to participate at the same level that you and me are showing up at. Nor should he be, because I'm not in that type of relationship with my dad. But I can't take the same skill set that I've acquired from healing in this relationship with you and apply it to all of my relationships, because they're so different and so nuanced.
So different.
And what my dad sparks inside of me is different than what you do, right? So I'm at a different level of healing in regards to that. So it's always this constant ebb and flow, up and down, back and forth exchange with people, and then healing and then growing and evolving.
And that goes with like your friendships too. I'm just like, and it's not just friendships as a whole relationship. It's like my relationship with this friend versus my relationship with this friend. How I can show up in this space in the healthy level is very different than this. It is very much a spectrum.
It's
across
a huge spectrum.
the board.
And that's, I think, by design. Like, I think that's part of the human experience and why it's important to have interaction with multiple people and be in relationship with other people, because that's how you heal and change and evolve and grow. And that's like, social media has given us that experience. Unfortunately, I think we probably shouldn't have, like, it's like, rather than the nice slow trickle that we probably could have done with social, it just ripped the Band-Aid off. And now we're all thrown into this chaotic soup of like, in relationship with a million people all at the same time. That's not what it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be like small little chunks. And so use that mirroring effect of what social media can and does do, just in a much more kind of like conscious, controlled way, rather than this onslaught of being exposed to so many different things all at once. But this is,
and then just like, I just like add to that, like, if content hurts you, if our content hurts you, like,
don't follow us.
Get away from it.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to always sit in things that are discomforting either. Like, we choose to, not always. There's times we're looking like, that is not for me. I'm not participating.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay if you don't resonate with your family. It's okay if you don't resonate with a therapist. It's okay if you don't resonate with content creators. It's okay if you don't, like, you don't have to sit in something that is hurting you. If there's healing to be done there for you, you're going to come back to it. It's going to come back, but you get to like, get out of that space. You get to say, this hurt. I don't like this, and I'm not participating, and I'm out.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. If ever our stuff is hurting, like, don't, like, get away from it. Get away from it. You're good to reach out to us. There's times we're going to look at it and be like, oh, fuck, that was big. And then there's times we're going to say, I hear you. I see how that was hurtful. And this is why we're saying what we're saying.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many different things here.
Hopefully this helped. And if it didn't help, we did our best.
Yeah.
Like, we're so infallible. No, wait.
We're so fallible.
We're so fallible.
We're fallible.
Obviously, we can't even speak correctly. Like, we're on this neurodivergent
humans.
Spectrum of who knows what
Yeah.
we've got. We've got all sorts of different.
Now you narrow normal people, you're fallible too.
We grew up in the 80s, so it was a Wild West shit show back then.
It was just like, that's it, humans. Like, we're fallible. We are humans. But it's like, I don't know. I guess I'm feeling very, like, it's how you show up in it. It's where you're willing to be wrong, and it's also where you're willing to be right.
Yeah.
Like, there's a whole thing. And I want to say, if you are still here, you're listening, you happen to be somebody who is experiencing violence, or you know somebody who is, like, go to the hotline.org. And it's a website. It's got resources. You also, if you don't have access to that, you can text 88788. There's help out there. It's time to start reaching out, and it has its most power when you are quiet. Now, speaking is scary, I know, and it can be dangerous. That's why you have to start in ways where you can find help. You can find resources and allow help in. So go to the hotline.org, text 88788, and get some help. Get some help.
Yeah.
If you know somebody who is a victim, help them out.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for supporting Steph and Craig and the Steph and Craig Show. You can follow the podcast, or not follow, but subscribe to the podcast anywhere that it is available. And yeah, thank you. We'll see everybody next week. What's our tag, babe?
Expect the best. Plan for the greatest. Am I saying the whole thing? Expect the best. Plan for the greatest.
We'll see you guys on the next episode.
Wait and see, you and me, we were meant to be.
We want to make something perfectly clear. This podcast is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as a substitute for professional advice. We're sharing with you our own personal experiences and insights, things we have found to be helpful on our healing journey. But we are not licensed therapists. If you need help, it's important to seek out a qualified professional. Remember, we believe that we all do better when we heal together. See you soon.